the next thing to really think about is CapEx and maintenance request. One of the things that comes with owning a home over time is capital expenditures, right? So that's, you need a new roof, you got to paint the house, the stove needs to be replaced, something like that. So
the dryer's not drying.
Those are all things that come by way of either, something happens or you get a maintenance request.
Hey guys, this is Aisha Shelton.
And this is Kevin Shelton.
Welcome back to the Marriage and Real Estate Podcast.
Welcome back. So this week, we are talking about landlord leasing strategies that we use in our rental properties and that you can use in yours too. So, of course, everybody has a different strategy and you can do many different things when it comes to leasing a home. But for us, here's some of the things that we do that make the process a little bit easier, and some of the things that we think about while we're going through either renting out a house or renewing a lease and things like that.
Yep. So step one is you got to find a tenant. You got a place, whether it's an inherited place or a renovated place that you've done, or like myself, it is a house that you own and you've got a better house and you're leasing out the other one, right?
Yep.
So finding a tenant, what do we do to find our first tenant?
So a lot of times this can be the hardest part for people because, your tenant criteria is everything. So I think that especially for beginning landlords or people who are maybe accidental landlords, you definitely want to work with a realtor. I think that can help you a lot, especially if you're not as familiar with, vetting a tenant and things like that. But the first thing that you want to do is really set a criteria based on what you're comfortable with. So whether that's non-smoking because, you don't want any smokers in your house, or maybe you don't want pets, or, maybe you want somebody who has, no car or something because you don't have parking. You just don't know what kind of applicants you'll get. So by setting that criteria, it really helps you refine down who would be a good fit for your property and who wouldn't.
I think you make a good point too, because there's certain class of rentals, right? Yep. There's A, B, C, and D class rentals. All of them make money, right? Yep. And you need to determine what class of rental yours will be. Now, understand that you must know what class of rental it falls into, right? Before you decide what tenant you want. But just like there are Section 8 landlords and Section 8 investors, that can certainly be a thing. You're guaranteed a check as long as the government stays open. You're guaranteed a check. And so for some people, they like that investment model. For us, for example, we have a tenant avatar that is
young professionals,
young professional,
small families, individuals,
no smoking kind of thing. So I would say, first of all, you want to see what your avatar, what you want it to be, and also what fits into the area that you're in.
Now, let me give a disclaimer because, just being a part of real estate and Aisha being a licensed professional, we want to say discrimination is illegal, right? So you want to make sure that you're not setting a criteria that discriminates from particular groups of people, but you really want to base it on what the, not necessarily actions, but what the how do you say what like smoking and stuff is, the practices of the people who live there, right? So for instance, if you want a non-smoking house, that's perfectly acceptable. So it's not necessarily discrimination because you're not saying, non-smoking people need not apply, but you are saying you prefer a tenant that is non-smoking, right? People with pets, some people have pets, and you can make a case-by-case determination based on that, but you ultimately get to decide if you want a pet in your home that could potentially, damage things or stuff like that.
So when I was thinking about, finding a tenant and this particular point that we were making, one of the things that we didn't use a realtor. So we found our first time. So the first time we put a tenant into our property.
We actually didn't use a realtor. The second time you were the realtor.
That is a realtor.
Well,
There we go. So we didn't use a realtor the first time. We just put it on a website called cozy.co. At the time, I think they've been bought by apartment.com right now.
Yep.
But we put it on cozy.co, who put it on Zillow and
like 20 different websites,
several different, apartment home finding websites. And that was how we marketed the property, and we found our first tenant. There were also other advantages to using that particular platform. They did automatic debit and deposit into our account. So they debit from our tenant's account and deposit it into our bank account. They could also send maintenance requests through that platform.
They had the management platform on the back end of that.
It was the
website.
management on.
Yep.
So that not only did they have the ability to share our house on 20 different platforms, but also they had the management, and that was free.
Yeah. So one of the things that you want to look at, once you set your criteria and you put your property out there to market it, right? The next step is vetting your tenant. So let's say, for instance, you've listed your property on all these different websites, and now you're starting to get people in who are responding to that. Then you want to go through the steps of actually vetting each of the tenants. So that's going through the background checks and going through credit checks, employment verifications. And a lot of that stuff can be automated like a cozy.co. And some of those things are manual, like calling people's employers and things like that.
Yeah. So when this is definitely going from the perspective of, when we didn't use a realtor, we had the book, The Bigger Pockets Guide to
Managing Rental Properties.
Yes. So that weighed heavily on the decisions that we made and how we drew up our contract as well.
Which we highly recommend.
Yes. So when we were vetting our tenant, we knew that we didn't want to have pets. We knew that we wanted it to
be, we ended up taking pets.
We did. We knew that we wanted it to be non-smoking, and a typical rule of thumb is their income must be 3 times the rent, right? So whatever you set the rent to be, you want that person's income to be 3 times that amount. What that shows is the propensity to pay the rent outside of all of their other obligations, right? You have car notes, you have credit cards, or whatever expenses that you have, student loans. So if you make 3 times the rent, this should only be, I think the ratio is like your housing expense
should be like 20%.
Is it 20? Max. I thought it was like 30.
Well, it's max 20%. We want somebody to make 3 times the rent, but technical standards on what your housing should cost you is like 20% of your income.
Got it.
But I think one of the benefits of that 3 times rule is, when everything goes, to hell, for lack of a better words, one of the first things people stop paying is debt, things like that. But living is kind of that last straw. So you want to have enough cushion in their income that, whether it's 2 people or 1 person, that if everything goes to hell, they're at least paying their rent. And that kind of protects you as a landlord, because you may have a mortgage or may not have a mortgage that you have to pay. So you don't want somebody in your house that is underwater from when they start, right? Like if your rent is $1,500 and they make $1,500, there's no way that that's gonna work.
Well, if your rent is $1,500 and they make $3,000, and in most renters' mind, they think, well, I make $3,000, I can afford $1,500. However, you're not accounting for all of the other expenses that you have.
Food, groceries,
right? Like living expenses, right? And so 3 times is the general rule of thumb. It's a good rule of thumb to stick by. The same thing with credit score. Now, remember, if you are renting, depending on what class of home or unit that you're renting, you have to keep that in mind too. For that class of rentals, what is a typical credit score, right? And I think for us, we said a 620 and above.
Yeah, I think it was
620 and above, which isn't extremely high, right? But because we also understand that things happen. And so if you make 3 times the rent and you have at least a 620, you also get the opportunity with the apartment.com or cozy.co to see their credit report. And so you can see their payment history, which helps you to determine like, oh, you've had some recent missed payments. Do I feel like they'll be a good?
And we've had that before. We've had tenants that lost their job, missed a lease, or, maybe they moved jobs and their income decreased, or they went through a hard time. I know that one of our first tenants, it might have been 2 months after he signed his lease, he moved jobs and he lost income. And then he got a promotion or something and his income went up. So it gives you a good history of what they do when things are good or bad. And it allows you the ability to have those conversations with your tenants in advance to know, hey, in the event of something, will you communicate? Will you let me know? And in this case, our tenant was really good in communicating. He let us know as soon as his income changed. He said, just work with me for a while. I think he was late maybe twice and paid the late fees and everything. And then he was stellar the entire time. So, it doesn't mean that just because somebody's credit score is low or somebody maybe have some missed payments in their history, it doesn't necessarily mean that they'll be a bad tenant. You just have to have those conversations. It's just information for you to process to help you make a decision.
I also say trust your gut too, right? I remember getting an application and I don't know, the paycheck stubs, because you also verify with paycheck
stubs look real fishy.
They look real questionable. I was like, hold on, because see, I know people who operate like this.
Yeah. And then I think the company, when we looked it up, it didn't exist or they owned it or something, but they created themselves paycheck stubs.
Right.
And it was like 18-wheeler.
So be very cautious when vetting people's paperwork, because people make up stuff all the time. People make up check stubs or will recreate documents and submit them as, and I've seen that too as a real estate agent as well. Whenever I get applications, I'm like, this doesn't make any sense, right?
This ain't 3 times around. Like, I make $47,000 a month.
Yeah, or Googling the company that they work for, and it's like,
I think we had a house,
a boutique or something.
We had a house that was for rent $1,500 a month, and we got an applicant that made like $22,000 a month. And you have to ask yourself, why is a person who makes this much money trying to rent this house? That just doesn't make sense.
But he turned out to be the tenant. I chose him. Yes.
Is that the?
It is, because he's building another house on like an acre right now. He wanted to live close to his mother.
That was for one of your clients.
This is for one of my clients.
Okay.
Yes, he wanted to live close. I mean, it didn't make sense at first, right? But he's building a house on like an acre, which takes time, over a year. He wanted to stay close to his mother because she lived in the neighborhood, and he had a commission-based job, and he was the number one salesperson in the whole entire country. Yeah.
Okay. So I'll take it.
Do your research. That's all I got to say. When vetting
and the reason we spend so much time on vetting a tenant is because that's probably, out of all things, that's the most important step. The time you spend vetting your tenants will directly correlate to the time you spend either managing those tenants successfully or evicting those tenants because you've been unsuccessful.
Which is no fun.
Which you should know the laws in your particular market, in your state, to know what the eviction, processes, procedures is. The Bigger Pockets book can definitely help you with that. I think that one of the things that, especially with COVID in mind, is very hard. We live in a very landlord-friendly state, thankfully,
Texas,
but a lot of other markets aren't, like California or New York, where you have a lot more stipulations. So I would be very leery about, just kind of boilerplate practices. You want to make sure that you're based on your particular market, because that's what will regulate you.
Yeah. So deposits, insurance, and income, right? Mm-hmm. So deposits, that first and last month rent, we're all familiar with that. And check your state for laws as it relates to how those funds need to be managed, right? I know here in Texas, your deposit has to be in a separate bank account.
Yep.
Right. So you cannot use that money. And when at the end of that lease, it's used to return back to the tenant, less any expenses that come out.
And you upon request have to provide them a statement on that money. Right. So if they say, hey, where's my money? You can provide them like a statement showing it sitting in a bank account.
But I also wanted to talk about deposits by way of pets, right? Because that can also be a revenue source for you, right? So if you decide to take pets, and we did take pets on our first lease, but we also got the tip that we can charge a pet rent So there was a non-refundable pet deposit up front,
Mm-hmm.
and then they paid a per pet rent for each pet, right? So that made it worth it to us to accept pets, because originally we were not going to accept pets. But when we were like, okay, we can get $500 non-refundable and get,
extra $40 a month because they had 2 dogs. And they had two. It was $20 a month per dog.
Okay, $20 per month.
So it was $40 a month.
So $40 a month per dog. So I was like, okay, well, we'll take it, right?
Yeah. And that ended up, they ended up, there was no major damage. Their pets were well behaved. We did have stipulations. It was only certain sizes and certain breeds, non-aggressive, house trained, whatever. What we ended up doing though is after those tenants, we swapped all the flooring out to tile to make it easier in the future if we did take another pet.
Right.
Which thankfully the tenant after them, completely clean, single person, amazing, took amazing care of the house. And then now the tenants we have in that house, we
don't know.
Yeah, we don't.
Okay. we don't know. Because we haven't done the things that we're going to ask you to do. And so that's one income source. Also, washer and dryer. I've seen that be a source of income as well. We'll leave the washer and dryer for a monthly rate. And so, yeah, insurance. So your tenant should carry renter's insurance, and they should also provide proof of renter's insurance to you.
Which you can do that through some of the apps. I know that cozy.co, which is now apartments.com, they actually can give your tenant access to buy renter's insurance through them and automatically give you proof, which is how we do it currently.
I didn't know that. I remember getting reminders that they had not uploaded, because you upload, the tenant is able to upload that documentation into that software. And I remember getting reminders that it hadn't been done. And so you want to make sure that they have their renter's insurance, but also you have to have insurance that insures the home. Landlord insurance that insures the home. So do your research and your numbers on that as well.
No. So the next thing to really think about is CapEx and maintenance request. One of the things that comes with owning a home over time is capital expenditures. Right. So that's, you need a new roof, you got to paint the house, the stove needs to be replaced, something like that. So
the dryer's not drying.
Those are all things that come by way of either, something happens or you get a maintenance request. And I think for us, we've had a combination of lots of different things. So everything from the dryer not drying to replacing appliances to, like even this year, we'll repaint the house. And it's based on the age of the home, the condition of the home. We did a lot of upfront things on a lot of our properties because we renovated them. So everything from interior painting, replacing flooring, a lot of that was taken up in advance. But every time you have a turn, you need to do some version of that too. So, one of the things to consider is what could be on its last leg. If your AC unit's on its last leg before you move somebody in it, you can bet, 9 times out of 10, you might get a maintenance request for AC not working. Right. And you just need to be prepared to take care of those things as they come.
So I'm not going to make up numbers, but there is a percentage that is recommended that you set aside for capital expenditures.
It's 5 to 10%.
Thank you. So 5 to 10%, because the one thing we know is that they're going to come up at some point. And so you don't want to be surprised by this, expense that you weren't necessarily looking for, right? And so if you set aside that amount each month and put it in an account, when they come up, the blow is softer, and or you have the funds available to do that. So please take into account that you do have to have, there are some systems that legally have to be working in order for someone to live there, and you want to make sure that in the event that any of those things go down, that you're able to fix it immediately as a landlord.
Like smoke alarms or air conditioning,
air conditioning, water leaks.
And see, 5 to 10% scales with the condition of the home, right? So if you have an older home, you want to be on that 10% side. If you have a new construction home that you're renting out, or if you have something that's a little bit more recent, you can get away with having a smaller percentage because the house is in better condition, right? So I think that just goes with your comfortability. And if you have the funds to write those checks as they come up and you're good with that, then that's discretionary based on you. Right. So let's talk about kind of you're managing your property, how often do you see it, right? Are you doing inspections on your property? So I think you made a good point before we started recording. You were talking about making quarterly inspections, which it depends on, your proximity. I know some people live out of state and things like that. So it's either you or your property manager or, maybe a trusted advisor, a realtor, somebody to put eyes on that property, at least, quarterly. So you could see, hey, what's the condition of my home? Is my home still there?
Or semi-annually, right? So like you just want to see what's happening on the inside of your home, and you have the right to do that. And I think that, we've had the last few tenants we've gotten kind of comfortable. And now I'm just afraid to even call and ask because I'm like, what's happening in this house?
Was actually just there in February.
Okay, perfect. So there we go. I was
just there.
Okay, in the inside, right?
Yeah, because we had a maintenance request.
Okay, that's also a good reason, right? Also to service, and if you want a good reason to go into your tenant's place, like, oh, we are servicing the AC unit, so you're switching filters. That's a really good reason to go in to the unit, right? If you want to respect people's privacy, but also still put your eyes on it, you can call it maintenance. The property inspection. Oh, that's what I wanted to say. You want to make sure. I don't remember what I wanted to say. Sorry, lost it. Okay.
So basically, when you're inspecting a property, you're looking for if there's any violations of your lease, right? If there's any damage to the property, if there's anything that's not being taken care of, like yard maintenance, things like that, that they're responsible for. Smoking and a non-smoking. Pet damage is always a big one, I think.
I remember. Okay, here we go, guys. I remember it. Sorry, I had to interrupt you so that I don't forget it. So make friends with the neighbors, right?
Oh, yes.
Because they will tell you everything that your tenants are doing. You had like 5 cars out there last night.
Yeah. You ran into a neighbor at the grocery store.
Yes.
Of one of our rentals, and he said, and they had like 5 cars out there.
He said, they got a lot of people living in there. We're like, you can only have, the people on the lease that can live in this house. So
now he was a little extra.
He was, but they did have more people living in the house than they were supposed to.
That wasn't true.
It was true. You don't know, you don't live there. Okay. We don't want to argue like we're married on TV now, do we?
Okay.
So at any rate, the point is make friends with the neighbors because they will tell you what's going on with your house, what's going on at your house.
I think they had people in here from out of town, if I remember correct.
That was the case.
It was the winter storm. It was something like that. And he was like, they got a bunch of people over there. And it was some temporary condition that they had people in town for a conference, AKA conference or something like that. It was some kind of something. But people weren't there.
Kevin always think he muddles stuff up and make up stories and make it a thing, but we're not going to argue on the podcast.
True. Okay. Anyway, so property inspections, and then finally lease renewal or move out. So every year, of course, your leases come up if you do 12-month leases. You
should do 12-month leases.
And, that gives you the opportunity to either renew your lease or your tenants will be moving out. And then in that regard, you'd have to do a kind of make ready. So with the lease renewal, that's the easiest for you, but there's a couple of things you want to consider. That's rent raises. So that can be, a 3 to 5% increase in your rent potentially, and you kind of negotiate that up front, or you can just do a straight line renewal based on what rent rate you currently have. We've done a little bit of both, and it really just depends on the strength of the tenant. And if it's somebody you already know you're priced right at the top of the market or at market, and you don't want to disturb a good thing, then, that's up to you. But it is an opportunity for you to either bring your property up to market value, because market value does change, or make additional revenue and additional value by increasing your rent.
And let's not negate the value of a tenant who pays their rent on time and has been with you for years. That's not to say that you shouldn't raise rents, but certainly consider that when you are raising rents.
For sure.
And then too, for lease renewal, making sure that, I know in our contracts, it has a time period that they have to let us know that they'll be either staying or leaving, so that we can release it before they move out, right? So that we can lease it up, before the next tenant, so that we can have another tenant lined up.
And that just really gives you time. We actually just went through this with one property where they let us know, hey, we think we're going to be moving. And then they looked at the market and they were like, maybe we don't want to do that. And honestly, it gives you an opportunity to have that conversation, because it is a lot to make ready a property too, right? So let's say your tenant moves out, well, then you got to repaint or touch up or, do what you need to do, recaulk the tubs, do a deep clean. There's a lot of things that come into making a property ready to rent, and those have costs associated. So, if it costs you $5,000 to make ready and you were only making $300 a month for last year, well, you lost money that year. So you want to think about all those things because there's a cost to everything. And all these are things just to consider. So.
And I mean, we are sharing things that we've experienced. We're open to questions that you might have. You can leave them in the comments of this video, and we'll be happy to go back through and answer those questions. So
awesome. No, I think this is a good kind of overview of, being a landlord and what it looks like from the Shelton's perspective. And definitely, like Aisha said, drop us a note in the comments, look for more fun advice and tips and things like that, and the way that we've learned to do it over the years. But yeah, this is the Marriage of Real Estate podcast. This is Kevin.
This is Aisha.
We out.